or Mistress of Ceremonies. You know, I don't know why we don't have more Mistress of Ceremonies. I mean, I'm certainly not a Master of Ceremonies. To hold our first Peripheries Research Theme called Path Less Travel, that women negotiating research journeys. And it's great to be part of the Dundee Women's Festival as well. The panellists who I will introduce in a minute are all members of the Peripheries Research Theme, and that is the theme in the School of Education and Social Work. And we have people from the school, people from other universities. We have actually people from around the globe. In fact, our group is made up of people from over 16 countries. So we've only been going for a short while, and we're really interested in linking with independent researchers, people doing research in the community, and also talking to people who are interested in doing research. So I guess part of today was to share our experiences, to talk about our passion. All these people here, all these women here are really passionate about research. They may not look like it because it's Friday afternoon. You know, an academic's on a Friday afternoon, well, that's another story in itself. But they are super passionate. But I guess that's an opportunity to hear about why they're passionate, but also, I guess, some of the challenges in undertaking research. And each person here, and I'm kind of personally interviewing each of them, no, not really, but I know little bits about them. Each person here has an interesting story to tell. It's a winding roads story about how they got to where they are today. So you should all have a program. Has anybody not got a program? Okay, so we're advised, okay, right. So we are audio recording the panelist responses. So basically, if you look at the program, the panel is going to be, I'm going to interrogate the panel with a smile on my face and ask them a series of questions. Firstly, focusing on their past lives before they, when they were growing up. Their stories about, because I'm really interested in exploring the influences, to look at their present realities and then to look at their future plans. And then when we've got through all that, it'll be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you see fit. If we run out of time or there's a question you want to ask but you don't want to ask it so publicly, we have this lovely box here. It's got questions written on it. If we're happy to follow up, if you want to write us a note, there's something you're absolutely busting to know, one of us will get back to you, provided you with your contact details, of course. We're not that brilliant otherwise. Okay. The session is being signed. There's also an induction link for those of you who wear hearing aids you can put on the T-switch. So the panel is being audio recorded, but the audience questions won't. Before we get into it and I start the process and introduce the panel, I just want to open, I guess, on a more sombre note to acknowledge the 29 people who were murdered by terrorists this morning in Christchurch in New Zealand, and the 50 plus who were injured. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. It's kind of cast a little bit of a shadow over the event, but one thing about today's session is hopefully research, and this is not a long stretch, but hopefully research can help people with developing informed decision making about what's going on in the world. And I think I've always been a great advocate of the fact that knowledge is power and the importance for education for social change. So on that note, I'll introduce you to the panellists. They're up here in they're in large print. So we have Ashley Rogers, who's from Abbotsford, just down the road. And we have Andrea Rodriguez, who's from the School of Dentistry and works in the area of health promotion. There's little information things about this. She's not doing anyone's teeth today, so please don't ask her to look into your mouth or anything like that, okay? So we'll save that one. We've got Kaushalya Herath, who is very brave. She's a PhD student. That's not why she's brave, folks. Well, maybe. But she's actually, she only started her PhD on the 4th of March. So she's really new. She stepped off the plane literally a couple of days before that. And actually not thickly dressed there, so she's obviously acclimatising to Dundee. So we've got Lynn, who has been doing your PhD for how long now?
7 months.
7 months. 7 months and counting, how many days and hours. So she will talk about her story as well. We've got Lynn Kelly, who's from the School of Education and Social Work at University of Dundee. We've got Trish McCulloch, who told me don't put Patricia down. She gave me that look. Who also is from the School of Education and Social Work and has recently been promoted to a reader position. So you don't. Now we're all readers, so it'll be really interesting. Well, she must read something different. So we'll find out a little bit more about what that's about. We've got Camila. No, I should get your whole name here, Camila. No, it's not. So Camila. Biazus, Dalcin, who's a PhD student. How long have you been doing a PhD? 1 year. Okay, we'll find out more. Actually, some people are crazy, they want to do more than one PhD. So, all the way from Brazil. We've got Susan Levy, who's from the School of Education and Social Work. How long have you been in school? Too long. Okay, so she'll talk about those issues. Okay, and you've got myself as Mistress of Ceremonies. And I must say, you were really tempting because actually I want to be on the panel. And you can't do two things at once. So I want to start with going, I talked about the unlikely journeys, and I thought, well, I might use my mistress role to slightly put in my own two bob anyway, because each one of these women here are an example of what we call unlikely researchers. So, and in my own case, I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Education and Social Work, but my first job actually was putting lids on top of bottles and knives and forks in airline bags. You know, back in the days when we used to have proper knives and forks in sealed bags. So I started my first job as actually a sheltered workshop. Because back then, and this is 1981, so I'm showing my age, there was very low expectations for disabled people and particularly disabled women to even think about going to university and so on. So, you know, I would never have imagined where I am now. But let's go into the past and have a look at the past. I'm just wondering, Trish, they're all wondering about who we're going to put on first. You've got the microphone there. Yes, you need to use the microphone. I was just wondering, can you think about the first time that you heard the word research?
See, normally in these things that we have the Herath and get what question, this hasn't happened yet. Okay, I would say I probably heard the word research when I was at school, and I think primary school. And it probably for me was a kind of technical and administrative activity, something where you had to go away, you had to gather some information. So at that stage, quite a neutral thing, not something that was particularly exciting or not something that was associated with ideas, but this sort of fairly rudimentary gathering of information.
Right. Okay, well that's great. This is what I heard about research was people who are knocking at your doors in the middle of cooking dinner. You know, market research people, so it was like their trouble. They were kind of like one step away from missionaries. So let's have a look. What about you, Andrea? We'll just pass the mic. When did you first? Can you think about when you first heard the word research? Or knew about what research was? Yeah. When you were a young lass.
I think just with my graduation doing psychologist, I'm not a dentist, I'm a psychologist, and during my graduation I remember I had a class with a master's student, and he came to explain about his study, and this is a a very good memory to me because I pay attention because he was explaining his study with so much enthusiasm and so happiness and passion that I thought I want to do this as well because got my attention. I liked what he was doing. He was researching women in prostitution. So the topic was at that time very, very difficult to reach. And I remember after this, I applied for a scholarship to do research still as a student, psychologist, and then I got it, and then I passed it, I think, 4 years in my graduation doing research as well, because of this kind of passion that I saw come from him. And it's now I understand because people say, you has the same. When you say about what you do, we can see that you really like what you're doing. I think this is the most important message that I could pass for us. First of all, try to find out what is really important to you in terms of research, because it's not always something that we know. We have to really deep and try to find out.
Hopefully, in the session, we'll go into more detail.
Exactly.
Now, I'm going to keep this voluntary for the moment. Who else would like to respond to that question? This is what happens after something becomes casually silent. Okay, Dawn.
Okay, I know you were.
I told them I was going to do.
I think the word research for me, like always with me growing up, because it's about my family background. Both my parents and my grandparents from my mother's side used to work in university before they retired. So they were always talking about research in my home, in my family, get together. So this word is always with me. And I think my family background have impacted me a lot in terms of being a researcher or choosing to pursue my PhD study here.
Brilliant, brilliant. Anyone else like to add in? Okay, well I might add a little bit here. They're all a bit quiet now, we're getting warmed up. I can remember discovering research through my father, who was self-trained. A big bookshelf, I used to love looking at bookshelves. But I learned about research through something a bit old-fashioned these days, through stamp collecting. I couldn't work out why certain African countries kept changing names and why they had French or German or English on them. And then went to the atlas, and some of you are probably more my generation, remember the atlas was divided into colours. So you had the pink for the Great British Empire, and you had it kind of divided up in those ways. So I was really intrigued about that, and they used to have books on different countries. And I would say, when I grow up, I'm going to go and visit those places. Now, I'd like to ask questions about schooling because, as I said, people are like, one great thing about this panel is people of different ages and from different countries with a range of experiences. What was school like for you, Kaushalya? Was it a good, a bad experience? You know, what expectations did people have of you?
So in Sri Lanka, we get free education, so every kid, even from a poor family, can go to school. And so my mother was a primary school teacher, so I went to school with her until grade 5. And then when I went to, then after grade 5, my mother decided not to send me far away to school because my brother was born, so she thought that I might feel excluded if she sends me to a school in the town. So I went to another school 5 kilometers away from my home, but it was another small school. And not many people go to universities in my school, and there was no pressure to go to university. But my father worked in the capital, so I had some understanding about going to university. But nobody expected me to go to the university, and somehow I managed to go to the university from school. And now when I meet my friends from school, I kind of feel that I'm very different from them, and at the same time I'm very similar to them. We share the same past, but I don't sometimes find things to talk with them because we think in different levels now. Not in a very excluding term, but like our exposure is different because we had this limited world view, like limited understanding about the world, and like from my school, I don't think anybody went for like all island competitions, national level competitions, or only very few people went to universities.
So how many people I know a little bit of a backstory of Kaushalya, so I'm going to ask you, because in terms of where you are now as a person involved in a PhD program, I mean, how many people in your village, which is a remote village in Sri Lanka, went to university to get the PhD? So I think it's really important.
I was the first woman to go to university from my village.
Yeah. And there's not many, is there?
Yeah, and I'm probably the only one. I mean, most of them they don't understand what is a PhD, and they think I'm just a crazy woman, very unsuccessful in life, not achieving what I should be achieving in my age.
Yeah. Thank you. Lynn, over to you. Lynn, what was schooling like for you? Do you think girls were encouraged to look beyond the typing pool? Back in my day, that was certainly the primary option.
Although one of the best things I ever did was learn to type. I never had any idea how useful it would be. I can touch type faster than I can speak and think. So I did do typing, and I was very grateful to do that. I was at is it on? Should be.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
Pretend you're a rock singer.
I was. Another life.
Yeah.
I was at state school here in Dundee. I was at Dundee University for my first degree.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah.
Yeah.
But it has to be fair. Probably more people I was at school with ended up in prison than have at university. It's a really difficult school, although I really enjoyed it and have lifelong friends there. But the expectation of many of us actually going on to university from that particular school was quite low. Having said that, though, there are a lot of people from my school who have gone on and done wonderful things, but we were very much the exception and not the rule.
So I'm just wanting to draw that out because I think you and I come from a similar era, I guess, as I think like, I think you're obviously from a mixed girls and boys British school.
Yes, yeah.
So do you think that there were different expectations for girls? I mean, I also did the shorthand and the type.
Well, I don't know. I think for me it was never, certainly my father was very influential in having the confidence to actually. I think my dad was a professional footballer. He had 3 girls. I think that was always unfortunate for him. So he decided that the 3 of us we were going to be given the confidence that we could do anything that had we been boys. So I think from that perspective, my dad was actually a feminist. But not so much my mum. She came from a slightly different background. So there was always that sense from my father that we could go on and do what we wanted to do. My mother found that more difficult. Her view was get a job, not stop being lazy and you finish school, get a job. Whereas my dad had a different view. So that was helpful. But I don't remember anything particular from school in relation to gender. It was, I think, the biggest difference for me were those of us who had support from our families and those that didn't. And the vast majority of my peers at school didn't have that. Those of us that did. Now, that's not to say that those who didn't necessarily do well. Some people can do it despite the adversity. But I think for me that was the biggest difference, not specifically gender.
I think it's good that thanks Lynn, that you've made that point. And I think I mentioned that I had the support from my father. On the other hand, my mother, who I should say is actually Sri Lankan, as well as my Scottish father and Sri Lankan mother, I think culturally it seemed to actually, if you were too intelligent, that would not make you good marriage material. And that was like, what would you have to talk about? I'm just wondering, in terms of talking about Trish, what was schooling like for you? We'll get down the aisle here.
We were just having a little exchange of what's. I grew up in Dundee as well, so what school did you go to? And I went to the Rocky, and if you know Dundee, the Rocky was actually called Rockville High School. But again, it would have been a school in Dundee that didn't have a high proportion of its students going on to university. So in my school year, I think it was 3 of us that went to university. I have really positive memories of school, and school for me was exactly as people describe, access to this wider world of knowledge, of opportunity, of learning, I grew up in a really kind of close working class family. I lived with my mum. I was a single parent. And her kind of life experience hadn't afforded, combination of health, education, hadn't afforded her opportunities for learning and progress. So I think she was certainly always very supportive of that for me. Not necessarily able to offer that kind of intellectual stimulus, but certainly that kind of care and support that allows you to go to school and benefit. So school was a positive place. I think as a girl at school, I think school sometimes made it easier for girls to learn. Certainly I've got a girl and boy in primary school at the moment and see the different gender dynamics that still play out there. So school was positive, but absolutely framed by those gender limits. So I think I went through schooling and I did want to be a secretary when I was asked. I think the first time I remember saying that. And I think this was probably in high school, I was told to aim higher. So I aimed for a PA. That was the reach. There must have been something in me that kind of liked that sort of being organised. I also think it was a little bit influenced by Dalcin. I don't know if any of you were. That was my era. That was the evening telly when I was at Dalcin, the door was full of rich oil men working in big offices, and they always had a female PA who wore nice clothes. And so that was my aspiration. The other thing that sticks out there is when I was doing higher physics, my physics teacher, higher physics, this is at the other end. Again, really lovely, warm, nurturing, caring relationship from a physics teacher. And I remember his advice to me was, get yourself, he knew I was going to go on to university, and his advice was, get yourself off to St Andrews and find a rich husband. So again, it just, I didn't. No. I didn't go to St Andrews.
We'll come back to that. So, Susan, you're chapping at the bit. I'm going to put it on you, Susan. What do you want to be when you're a young child? What do you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I think my experience of school was quite different to some of the others. But I think it was quite functional. I wanted to be an dancer. So my incentive to actually be allowed by my parents to fulfill that dream was to ensure that I completed at least standard grade mathematics, GCSE, that level of education. So that was my aim. I aimed and I got what I wanted. So at 15 I left school and went off to dance school in London. So there I spent the next few years.
We should have those pictures of you.
I can tell you, there is people that came to fame in that. Whilst I was at dance school in London, actually, that I ended up in a Freddie Mercury video as a sign.
Wow.
So that's one more information. Yeah. So yes, I think research or university was not on my radar at that age. Although I had a sister that was older than me, and the time in school, I tended to be introduced or known as Catherine's sister. I'm not Catherine's sister. So she went off to Oxford, and then Susan went off to Dalcin. So quite different pathways there, but so yes, I ended up in St Andrews University, but a couple of years later.
Well, you probably there's still a chance you could go on. So Dancing with the Stars for the University of Dundee, maybe? You never know. Camila, different time, different country, what were the kind of, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you?
Well, I always wanted to be someone that takes care of the other people, so that was the main idea. I was thinking, because I was talking with the girls before, I also wanted to be a teacher for a while, because I had a really nice teacher in my primary school. I think that he would be like P2 or something like that. And then I said, no, I want to take care of people, because my grandpa got sick, and we went to the hospital for a while. And I remember that they allowed me to visit him sometimes, because he didn't have a good prognosis. And then I said, I really want to do what that people that were taking care of him did. And the week went well. And I managed to be, later on I managed to be a nurse. So that was my bachelor. So I was quite happy that, but I also wanted to be a dancer. And during the dancer and singer, but I need to say that my voice is not good at all. But I managed to dance for a while, for 6 years, but I didn't go forward in the professional now.
We might move down to, that's great, we might move down to Ashley down here. I think it's just dancers. I wanted to be like Elvis Presley. I can remember jumping on the bed and my mother saying to me, the only people who want to be poor, be a rock artist or an artist, you've got to get a real job. So what did you want to be?
A few different things actually. So I first wanted to be an interior designer, and be really honest. So this was maybe around about like changing rooms kind of era, where they would put together like orange and purple, of which I did adopt, where I had inflatable, sofas and inflatable furniture. I mean, my house does not look like that at all, just to reassure you. But that was probably my first, and my second aspiration was to then be a graphic designer. So you can see that relationship. There was a bit of creativity there, which is, almost entirely squashed now. But I joke, it's not. But I think as I got a bit older and I started thinking what do I really want to do, I became really interested in law. So I'm a criminologist now, so you could say there was a bit of that here, but it was more about how would I defend people, or how could I defend people who had done something that I fundamentally disagreed with. And so I guess that was when I started maybe thinking a bit more critically about things. But during that time at school, I wouldn't say I was necessarily encouraged by everyone at school or anything. There were a couple of teachers who really encouraged me, and my mum would, but I'm a first generation university student, no one else in my family had gone, so there wasn't even the word university until a teacher mentioned it, and I thought, what do people do there?
And do you just as a panel as a whole, and not everyone has to respond to it, but do you think it makes a difference if people are, I guess, are living in families where there's books around, I'm trying to think of a kind of electronic version of least e-books, but like there's actually books and magazines. Do you think that makes a difference? Would anyone like to respond to that? Or people watch documentaries, like unfortunately my daughter is in the audience. She has to put up with the fact that I'm constantly watching. I'm a documentary junkie. I'd rather watch a documentary over, what's that audio thing that, I've been in the UK for 2 years, it comes on called Channel 4 News. So it's kind of like my insight into British life, but she keeps assuring me it's not. That's right. But so normally I watch documentaries, so I'm just wondering, do you think being exposed to books and conversations, yeah?
I would actually like to answer that question because when I was in Sri Lanka, I used to watch this television program about like professors in Sri Lanka, just to feel good about myself. Because every time I watch this program, I see people talking. I mean, they are a generation or two ahead of me. But when they talk about like how there are books in their house and how they had access to knowledge, I think, okay, I didn't have any of these. I didn't have books at my home, and I didn't have a library close to my home. At least maybe library was like 10 kilometers away from my home, and the newspaper stand was like 15 kilometers away from my home. And I told my friends I watched this program just to feel good about myself. And then I told you my brother is 10 years younger to me, and he watches a lot of documentaries and television programs, and I get him books. And then I see how different he is from me. And just because he has me in the community, I'm a little egoistic saying that, but yes, like I feel happy about that because I can make things available for him. And I see how he has a good view about the world, and he knows what to do. He knows that he wants to go to the university, and he knows what he wants to do after university. He knows what he wants to do with his higher studies and all those things. But when I went to university, I didn't know what I really wanted to do. Just my teacher said, okay, you got good results, so you need to go to this program in the best technical university in the country, because they think doing qualitative stuff is really not worthy. If you have good results for your university entrance exam, you have to do something quantitative and technical. So they pushed me to this university, and I was like just going with the flow. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a teacher because my mother was a teacher. But that I see that difference when people have access to books, people who talk about things. Yeah. My only opening to world was my father coming home every weekend and sharing stories. And that made a huge difference. But that was my only opening. But the documentaries, TV series, because I only watched TV 1 hour a day because we didn't have electricity until I was 14 and we moved away from that village. My mother only let us watch TV for 1 hour because we got rechargeable batteries, and my father was not in the village. She couldn't go every day to charge the batteries. So she only let us watch TV for 1 hour. And that difference now I see just from inside my family, from my brother.
Thank you very much. In terms of most people here have exposure to books in the family.
Because since I've
Yeah.
I think because in my when I was young, in my dad's study, and he got 2 big bookshelves with lots of books. And then one day, I really remember that day, I entered the room and I saw a book. The name was The Ugly Chinese. And I was so intrigued by this name. So I opened it, and I think that this book opened my mind in terms of, because he wrote in such a criticized perspective. So the author gave me a different perspective to look into my culture and also my country, the general things about, it's bad things, but I think it's just opened my mind and opened my door to have a different perspective towards the world, towards my country and people around me.
Thanks, Dom. So we might just move on a bit. I think you'll probably find out about some of the strange fetishes and habits. I mean, we could talk, actually, researchers could probably sit and talk about books for hours. That's the serious stuff. I did discover a colleague many years ago who confessed to me that she liked sniffing and smelling books. And then I confessed, I could see a couple of people here nodding. I can remember getting, and it was a 15-volume set of ancient religions of the Near East. Now, I'm almost salivating thinking about it. I couldn't take it on the boat to come here. And it was made in India. Now, Indian paper and Indian ink has a particular aroma and smell. And anyway, she had to come from another campus. She was an historian. I remember this woman. And she came in and said, "Can we see the pile of books?" And it was this kind of... And I'm sure as some staff went by, thought, you people are really weird. Got some really weird fetish. But even to this day, and back at Kaushalya on the weekend, the first place we went to was St Andrews, and of course we went to a bookshop and smell of books. So we might just kind of, on that note, you can think about that. No one's going to necessarily admit other kinds of strange kind of habits they've got. But one of the things about it is it's the least travelled path, so we're still at the path at the moment, is I'm just wondering, we've had some signs, we've had the Dalcin, in terms of the kinds of jobs that people have done, because would you say that you thought you would be doing what you're doing now? I guess I'm really interested in, because, sometimes the traditional idea of an academic and as a researcher as someone who's done really brilliantly at school, they've gone into university, done an undergraduate degree, then done a master's, and then gone on to do a PhD, and then gone on to become an academic or working in the community. But in fact, what's really amazing about this panel is that's not the story for, I think, everybody in this room, in fact, about what kinds of journeys you took. So what sorts of jobs have you done and sort of transitions along the way? Were they jobs that you had to do to pay the bills, or were they ones that you chose to do? Lynn, what about you? You've done some amazing kinds of jobs over the years. Could spend hours listening to you about the range of jobs that you've done.
Yeah, when I left school, I went to train as a teacher, primary teacher. Here, actually, no, it's a Northern College, and that lasted about a year, because at the time I started, I had just gotten into punk. And I used to have pink hair and tartan Doc Martens, and the faces of the people when I turned up to teach, to do my practice, it was just awful, and I just found it very, very restrictive. So that didn't last very long, so I went back then I decided I wasn't going to be a teacher, so I came here to Dundee University and did a degree in politics, and it wasn't called social policy then, it was called social administration, which is now social policy, and I did philosophy as well, which I loved. And then I got offered a PhD, but at that point I was one of the first, this is interesting maybe, I was one of the first students at Dundee University to be a single parent, and actually got a letter from the university, and the person who wrote the letter actually became a good friend of mine. It was Ian Francis, who's no longer here, and Ian remembers writing to me, and he had to get his secretary to think about the wording of this letter, about whether, how do you talk to someone or how do you address someone. But it was a lovely letter. It was about how the university could support me.
So I asked you on the form.
Yeah, no, I was given a place, and then I had to defer because I had my daughter when I was very young, and then I came back. So the university had to give me a place the year later, and they had to write to me and offer what support they needed. So that was really quite interesting. And that was 1980. It's not that long ago. So that was interesting. But when I finished my degree, I got offered an opportunity to do a PhD at Strathclyde University, but because I had my daughter, I couldn't take it. So I then went into social work, and I had no idea what a social worker was. Absolutely no idea. But I wanted to be I thought maybe the option for me at that point is interesting. Most of my friends from university, we either became social workers, teachers, community education workers. Some then went off to do law. But it was a very small range of options. That's what I remember. Now that might not be true. Maybe people have all gone off to do other things. But at that time, the options for us with that kind of general arts degree was quite limited if you felt you needed to work.
And did you have a rule here? Because I come from Australia, as you can tell. But we used to have a rule in, I think you call it civil service, that if you got married, you actually had to resign. This was the thing in Australia, but there weren't those kinds of restrictions.
No, not
it sounds like it's the juggling of raising children.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I couldn't do the PhD at that time. I ended up doing social work, which I ended up doing for probably 30 odd years. Yeah. I always knew I wanted to go back and do a doctorate at some point, but was never able to afford it, so I went off to Stirling University, and I was very lucky at that point. I managed a sex offender project in Dundee, and Dundee City Council agreed to pay for me to do this. So I did a Master in Applied Social Research, which I noticed Ashley, did you do that? Yeah. And then I won funding got funded to do a doctorate at that point. And then again, it's interesting, my daughter has 3 children now, but when I got offered that place, partway through, my daughter had very premature twins, and she and her husband were living with me, so I took time out to look after the twins. But I spent quite a lot of time working at Stirling University on a kind of sessional kind of tutor type basis, and then I was offered a job here at Dundee, and Dundee University kindly funded me to finish my degree here. So I've been fortunate. I've never actually had to pay for my doctoral work. I've always been offered that support, which was hugely helpful. It would have been absolutely, yeah. So I was always very grateful for those opportunities, but not everyone can have that opportunity. Yeah.
Andrea, what sort of jobs have you done? I'll pass the mic down over the years.
Well, I started to work after my high school because in Brazil, to go to university, you have to pass a very difficult exam, and I didn't pass the first time, so I went to work in a store selling shoes, and the next year I tried again, and then I passed it. But during my whole graduation, I had to work as well in stores, selling clothes, selling school uniforms, selling bags, because my mom used to make backpacks and bags, and I used to help her to sell this at university. And when I finished my graduation, I did my master directly. My master, when I finished, I decided, no, I don't want to work in academia. I want to work in NGOs, in social projects. I want to put my hands on something. I was a bit, I had critical about university at that time. I had a very good teacher, and she used said, like in a joke, was saying, I teach because I don't know how to do it. But who knows how to do it? They don't teach, they are doing. So I was those that wanted to do something. Not to me, working in academia was to think about problems, was not to act on them. And then I worked for 5 years, and then I started to miss the university again, the place to study, to debate ideas, and I changed my mind about this place as a place that you can transform and change things as well. And then I came back to university to do my PhD, but always doing things in parallel.
Okay, yes. And you also look after your young daughters, too?
Yes.
Juggling. How do you find juggling the issue of having children and having a career? Because you know, apart from the myth that academics sit in the navel days and sit on their backside and don't do much, it's actually an extremely demanding job. So what's it like balancing?
First of all, I decided to have children when I was 40, because I had this idea, but I have to do so many things first. How can I find space to look after children? But then with 40, people start to say, please, if you want to have a family, it's better you start, because we, as a woman, we have a biological time. It's not like a man. We have a limitation. So then I started to travel to 40, and luckily I got pregnant, and I was living here. I moved from Brazil, so I had my children in another country. At that time, I had no English, so it was very difficult to me to pass so new things, being a mom in a new country without speaking the language better, not express myself. I still feel it's a barrier to. I don't feel completely me myself when speaking English, but I think it's a process. And of course, the experience of being a mom was amazing, but at the same time, I missed so much my identity as a professional. And the guilt that comes with this, because people say, but you should be happy. You don't need to work, you just look after your baby, your husband's working. I was so sad. Not happy, but at the same time, I want to have this side of it. Exactly. Yeah. It's a very, it's a dilemma for us. And it still is difficult because we work, but children, they have so much unexpected situations.
And it would be an interesting project, which we won't do here now, but it would be interesting actually, particularly the audience who are thinking around transitions. I was thinking about to do a little check of the ages of the women, how old they were when they had their children. I mean, I had one at 38, so, and I went back 2 weeks after giving birth, and brought the baby to the lecture theatre 2 weeks after, flying to work. You have to work baby. So I'm going to move on a bit because we're in that transition. We're actually going into the present. Now, the thing about it, I thought these guys would be really shy, but they actually are changing. So I've asked them to summarise their research each in 50 words. So let's just see if they can do this. Just to talk very briefly, 50 words, and I'll hold you to it. Just to talk about just what you're doing, and then we're going to talk about some of the torture and trials and passions of doing research. Ashley.
Didn't pay words. So my research largely explores human rights and access to law. So what does law mean in everyday life? So in particular, I explored access to law in relation to violence against women in Bolivia and in South America.
That's brilliant. What a great summary. Okay, 50 words, Andrea.
Oh my God. Currently, my research is about young people experience homelessness in Scotland, and I focus on the their life trajectories across homelessness, how they become homeless, during this period and after, how they can sustain outside the homelessness cycle, looking specifically how the services exist or not to support them through the different phases of new homelessness.
Brilliant. Kaushalya.
I'm just starting my PhD, and my research is about how women and marginal groups are familiarizing to spaces and how they change spaces into more inclusive spaces during their familiarization process.
Yeah. I should say Kaushalya's background, she's a town planner. So she'll bring a different perspective to it. Don't.
So my research interest is about young people and school leavers with autism and the transition from school to work. So I'm now looking at generally the attitudes and the discrimination of the society or the employer and families, the attitude towards the people with disability. And because I think even though the policy and the intervention have been improved a lot, but the people's attitude towards those disability can impact a lot in terms of the implementation and the law, the implementation of the law. Yes.
Thank you very much. Lynn?
My research areas have changed over time. I initially started looking at child protection and the impact of statutory supervision on children and families who become involved in those statutory processes. My doctoral work was around professional learning, and I did, with some colleagues, quite a large study looking at police education, which was quite useful. But more recently, I'm a member of the Parole Board for Scotland, so my interest currently is around international perspectives on parole and people's experiences of parole, looking at prisoner experiences. We've launched a survey on that, and then hopefully in the future looking at victim perspectives on parole.
Right, thank you. Trish?
My research is about people. It's mostly about people who offend and people's journeys into and out of the criminal justice system. I'm really trying to understand what helps and hinders people as they move out of crime. Beyond that, I'm also doing research around professional learning, professional education.
Fantastic. Camila?
So my research, what I'm looking at in the moment is about the healthcare provision and the healthcare access of marginalized groups in the society. And because of a collaboration that we have with the University of Stirling and the University of Dundee, we are looking out at the healthcare access for young offenders and how is the perception from stakeholders and staff and also from the people that commit an offense related to how much the society and health and the health policies help them to really have the provision of care that they deserve.
Thank you. Susan?
Okay, my research is looking at broadly around issues around inclusion, well-being, particularly within the context of disability studies. And I've recently been looking at use of arts within social work, use of arts as a form of communication with developed agency and confidence in certain users. And also trying some work now on targeting knowledge, the idea of targeting knowledge within social work, international social work.
Right, thank you. Now we're coming to true confession times to kind of like line it up a bit. It's how to talk about research in a way that's interesting, to share the passion. Now when I was younger, I've been doing research for several years now, I was a very difficult person to live with. Because I used to have tantrums. They're called writing tantrums. I'd say, I'm going to set up this project, and I would overthink it, and be complex. You'd rewrite, I'd kind of scream and carry on, and it was like getting blood out of a stone. I can remember explaining that to my 5-year-old what that expression meant. And I just decided one day, this is ridiculous, this is really hard work. Research or writing shouldn't be a form of torture. There's something quite abusive about that, something quite sadistic. Why would you be attracted to something that's causing you migraines and headaches and various other forms of neuroticism. So I kind of got my act together. Part of it was that self-consciousness, because I left school when I was quite young too, so I had issues around, could I write, what's the correct words, how do I start sentences with the, but, and all these kinds of things. So those of you in the audience thinking, oh, there's no way I could do research, a lot of us struggle with this. So I'm just kind of wondering whether anyone would like to share some stories. Do you think are researchers natural born writers? You know, what have been your experiences of writing, and has it something that's changed over time? Have you noticed a growth and improvement in your writing and maybe even your mental health? If you've never, I mean, you might be gifted. It might just come naturally, like a tone from heaven. But anyone like to share some writing experiences? What's it really like spending hours in front of the computer or handwriting? Okay, we want to start with Ashley. And Ashley, I should say, only recently, she's just come out of this thing. She's recently, really began to do last year, wasn't it?
Yes,
So the aftermath.
Yeah, so I submitted my PhD in August 2017, and I was in December 2017, and then submitted the final thing in January. And part of the reason why I was like, you know, I'll tell a story about this, because it isn't necessarily a pretty sight, and I do have in the audience ex-office mates of mine, that's all good correct in there. So she would be able to vouch for me here too. But while I was writing, I was actually just really mean. I just wasn't a really nice person. I got to a point where, if I'm really honest, I built myself here in a shared office space, and I built a bit of a wall. So I pulled my desk into the corner a little and tried to hold myself in, still marginally within health and safety standards, so that, you know, should there be a reason for me to exit, I could get out quickly. But I started to build stuff up at the side, and I even sat in a barricade, and I wrote a sign. And if anyone else happens to listen to this afterwards, it's shared office with me at this moment, they will know. I made a sign that just said "Do not disturb," but it was in red, like really quite serious letters. And at times I would also, if no one else was in, I would put the lights off and lock the door of the office just to pretend that I wasn't in, so that no one would come and see me. And yet that's not like me, so I realise I'm not really presenting myself very well. I actually love to help people and talk through these processes. But actually, at that moment, I just wasn't interested. And people would walk in and I would say, "What?" as they walked in the door, you know, and they say, "Oh, sorry, I actually wanted to see if you wanted cake." But then I'm so filled with pride that I say, "No, I don't want cake right now." And then actually I just thought,
have you worked your life? Obviously there's self-awareness about this, like, is it something now to try and make it joyful as against being...
Yeah, I would say it is more joyful now. I think now, at the time of writing the PhD, I think I was so pressured by the PhD environment, I felt like a bit of an imposter, that everyone else must be writing, you know, in a way that was just far superior to me. And sometimes I would read some other people's stuff, and it's not to say anything about your stuff, I think I can do that. But then when I sat down to do it, the words just didn't come. Or they did, but they were like word vomit. You know, it didn't really look very good. So now I actually take a bit more time now, and I think a little bit more, and I try to enjoy those times of not being able to figure something out. It's like I can't do maths, but it's like a maths puzzle. And now it's about thinking, this is actually really fascinating. How do I get from here to here? And I started to enjoy that process more now. And I wish I actually could go back and maybe, and I loved doing my PhD, it didn't sound like it there, but I did love it, but actually I wish I could go back and realise that I was loving it at the time.
Enjoying the moment.
Yeah. You can always bring me cake, so I mean, that was just my pride.
Okay, Lynn is chatting at Levy. It's all going to eventually come out when we talk about the good, bad, and the ugly.
I think that we need to remember that what actually appears in print is a tiny tip of an iceberg, and that was always important for me. The actual finished production is a small amount of the effort that goes into producing, whether it's a journal article or a book chapter or a report. I've always been lucky that I've worked with other people, and between us we work out where our skills lie. I've learned to write, and I can write reasonably well. I know people who can write a lot better. So what I like to do is to work out with people. Because of my background in social work, I feel my skills are in collecting the data, and I work well with people who are vulnerable or people with power. So I have no issue in interviewing a justice minister or someone whose child's been removed. I can collect the data really, really well, and I can begin to make sense of that in relation to a professional context. And what my bit then is to do is to present that in a way that someone can then further craft that, and then it becomes an iterative thing back and forward. So the bit that actually you see in publication, that's X number of hours. What's gone before that is almost a year's work. And I think that's something that's not always recognised. It's about the output, and the output is only a product of a huge amount of effort that we often don't see and don't recognise.
I think that's an important point, because I think some people, when you say you're undertaking research and studies, it's what do you do with your time? I think there's a mystery that we're sitting there twiddling our thumbs.
It's also the conversations you have with people. I mean, Divya, and just leave. Sorry, Divya, but Divya was my doctor. But no, just no. I was just saying that you were one of my doctoral supervisors, and it was hours and hours of Divya's time with me, or Sharon's time with me, and other people. And as it goes on, it's these unnoted, sort of these invisible hours of time that go into actually what comes out as a doctoral thesis or whatever. So I think that the actual end product, you shouldn't focus too much on that. That kind of looks after itself. It's being mindful of the process of getting there.
Now, Trish, I'm going to ask you. You're the reader. You're lots of reading. Obviously, you have lots of experience doing research. Is that something, writing, is that something that comes natural to you, or do you have any demons to deal with?
None at all. No, I'm laughing at that because I suppose there's a few things I'd like to say about that. And I think the first one is, I think there, for many of us, is a really strong relationship between writing and confidence. And I would say I spent most of my research career being unconfident in writing, in research, and the pain of research hasn't been the research, the pain has been the lack of belief in my ability to do this, in my right to do this. So I would say I am becoming confident. And that doesn't mean I think I'm great at research and writing, because I'm not, but I am discovering that one of my obstacles is confidence, and I need to deal with it. I need to work on that in the same way that I work on other research skills. I was laughing at the beginning because my research supervisor is also here, and I used to have supervision sessions, and I would joke that he really ought to install a kind of couch in his office, because I almost felt like I was going to see my psychiatrist as I started processing the kind of anxiety or unease and the unwillingness to believe that I should be doing this, and all the kind of crying that went with that. So I can kind of sit today, not in the midst of a research study that I'm struggling with, and say that confidence is really important. And I think that relates to a lot of issues we've been talking about our socialisation and our journeys into research, because I didn't grow up in an environment where people around me were doing these things. I didn't grow up thinking I'd read the right books or gone through the traditional research route. And all of these things led to this kind of belief that's why I struggle with this or that. And I suppose I realise now that if you've not had that access, I would say I discovered social issues through living social issues. My insight into the social world started through living through difference and all of these kind of issues and themes that I started to read about when I was at university. So now I realise that is part of who I am as a researcher. Those are the kind of skills and strengths that I need to bring into my work, and some of the battles with confidence are the things that I need to work on. So I wanted to kind of say a word about that. I think you were kind of saying writing has become easy. The natural response is no, it doesn't. But I kind of thought you've got to be careful there, because not all writing is painful. Some types of writing are painful. Writing for peer review is painful. Writing a report, not so much for me. But when I think about the kind of struggle of writing, a lot of it for me is actually the relationship between language and ideas. And often my ideas are not neat enough for the language I have to use or the structure I have to kind of work within. So, you know, I could go on about that. One of my favourite authors is Virginia Woolf, and she talks about the campaigns of language and how it doesn't behave and conform to, and that's my experience of writing a paper. I have these ideas, I want to say that in more interesting, creative ways than sometimes I feel the constraints of academia will allow for. So I suppose what I'm highlighting is there's so many different dynamics to writing and to research. We're probably all good at parts of that, and it's trying to kind of get a grip on that and say, yeah, I'm good at this part, and I need to work on this.
That's great. I think you get a sense that it's about gradually becoming easier with yourself too, and I think it's interesting to struggle with confidence and assuming that the people maybe we work we like and that we mentor, that somehow it's easy for them, and that self-doubt. I mean, certainly I've often said to people thinking about PhDs that the PhD itself is an intellectual exercise, and I might get shot down here, but I don't know. But I don't think it's that difficult. I think what's difficult about it is like I compare it to a monastic journey of going out into the desert, because it's about staying on target, how not to get bored, but you're dealing with lots of questions of self-doubt. And sometimes even being, as you say, overwhelmed by the complexity of dealing with language and ideas. And most of us, or everyone here is doing what they're doing because it's not research separate from people. People are passionate about the outcomes of the research, whether it makes a difference in terms of social change. Yep.
No, I just, sorry, Fiona, but I think that is important as well as an international panel to talk about, speak a little bit about the challenge of writing English. It's a nightmare because it matches your confidence. I think that I am another person in Portuguese, and when Andrea said that before, I feel so much more intelligent and clever in Portuguese, even that I'm not even close to a lot of people that I know. So when it comes to English, you feel that I feel that I have another personality, definitely. Because in Brazil, and I think that might be from other countries as well, we don't have a good English in the school. All that I knew was verb to be, and that's it, and how are you, and that was English, and not even writing. So my mom, and I'm really grateful for her, because I think that she could see much more forward than me. She stopped doing a lot of the things that she liked to pay for me and my sister English course that are extremely expensive. They are almost the price of the university. And it was really hard because even there you don't learn to write. So I feel that in Portuguese I'm much more poetic, and the things, even the academic writing in Portuguese, when you are poetic and you write a sentence that have a lot of metaphor and everything, makes a lot of sense and you are really valuable about that. But when you write in English, you need to be much more direct and follow a structure, and you don't know the rules. You don't know how to play in that field, because I also Bourdieu, and then it comes that I just don't know how it works, and you have to learn a whole new world about writing for academic English. So it's terrifying, and I am in this process now. What would take me, I don't know. I know that creativity comes with the writing, it depends on the time, but if it would take me to write 1 page in Portuguese a day, in English it takes me a week. And I don't want anyone to feel pity or anything, because I'm here because I want, and I managed fellowships to be here, but it is an extra challenge. And I think that is also nice if maybe in academia we could open ourselves a little bit more about this difference in the language style, and even the peer reviews, because as you said, writing a report, writing a poetry is so much nicer because you can use your creativity, and sometimes academia tends to put everybody inside a box. Okay. Maybe we need to think about going out of the box.
Well, that's a good point to actually that you've made. So I'm wondering whether you think research has any role in public debates. I mean, we're in the era of lots of fake news that's around. Actually, we're also in an era of social media where there's lots of bad research around things, and there's if you're not aware, this is the thing I get excited about. One of the great hot sites I like going to is Retraction International, which is a great site because it actually talks about really bad, falsified, often scientific research, but then also they do get to the humanities as well in other areas, but it's about the stuff that, been awarded lots of money and influences government policy and decisions, and it's been shown to either be totally false in terms of manufactured data or stolen data or people have nicked each. It's a hot gossip place and nicked each other's word. But the really good thing is that researchers do take this process seriously, so things get withdrawn from the journals. But I'm just wondering, do you think what role research plays in public debates and whether the public takes research seriously? Do you want your research to be socially meaningful? Would you like to have a stab at that?
I have a lot of concerns about that, particularly in the field of social work, social care. My doctoral work was looking at how child protection workers use knowledge. And in fact what we found, and it was using students who had put themselves forward for postgraduate work, and they themselves I used their essays as my data, and it was their stories of how they found themselves as practitioners being able to access research and new learning and new knowledge, and the barriers were absolutely overwhelming. Now I think this is a big issue for the professions going forward, is we have a degree profession, which I think lots of us think is important for the status of our professions, but then people go out into practice and the reality of continuing with your learning in the context of adversity and all sorts of other issues that are around is really going to be challenging. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about, if I want to use your word, Fiona, is how do we bring practitioners on board with us in research projects. I did a project a few years back with a colleague of mine where the local authority had asked us to look at the relationship between child protection case conferences and the people who took part in them. They outlined a very rigid methodology that we had to agree to as part of the funding. What that meant was that we never interviewed half of the people that we would have interviewed otherwise. And I absolutely know that that became a paper, 2 papers actually, hopefully, the second one's under review, and a report, but I absolutely think that made very little difference to the practice in that area. And if I had been allowed to work on that method in a much more collegiate way, in a we call co-production or working in partnership, there would have been very little need for that necessarily to have gone into publication, because the people would have been learning along with us. So this idea that we do it in separate from the people who are actually doing the work, I think is an issue, and I think that we need to begin to think about how we include people in the journey. Because I think that practitioners, my passion is I think practitioners like myself, I'm a social worker who became an academic as a second career, and I think we need to get more people who are doing practice to become academics. We've got lots of academics who would possibly struggle with going into practice, and that's fine. That's, if you want to look at things from a theoretical perspective, there's a place for that. But I think going forward, if we are going to be making a difference, we need to be taking people on the journey with us. So it's not us doing research that kind of sits separately. I know that people think, oh no, things have changed, things have got better. In my experience, we're just at the beginning of that process.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to ask you a question, because you're doing the criminal justice area, and do you think that I'm aware of it because I'm helping my daughter with her dissertation at the moment, is this relationship between, prisons and reductions in crime and increases in prison. And yet we're aware of the fact that a lot of public policy is actually driven by a mob mentality that, we've got to clean up crime and prisons are the best place. Do you think that what role in your area does research have in educating the public about issues? In fact, for example, in some areas there's been a radical decline in crime, and yet if you're reading the Daily Mail and other kinds of rags, you would think that we were in this kind of jungle out there of vicious crime.
Yeah, I think I think in my area, so my area in criminology tends to be more related to not so much street crime, but related to more crimes with our more critical kind of perspective, so trying to dismantle what do we even mean by crime. So people use the language of the criminal. Like, who is the criminal? It's somebody who has committed a crime. Okay, great. So what's the crime? And who gets to define what that is? Who gets to define who comes under that term? In relation to the prison population, it means that we will talk about people. People use all various language. So you might use people with offending behaviour. So that notion of people with offending behaviour might draw our attention to something else that's going on, as opposed to labelling someone as a prisoner or as a criminal. And I think in terms of getting that out there, I think it can be a bit of a struggle. So I think media channels are really important. However, I would always exercise caution in relation to the fact that we would perhaps associate media as part of that powerful, who get to construct the way that we think about people who offend, people who commit crimes, as they're legally defined. But it's about thinking what we as a society start to find offensive. What starts to offend us? What do we do about that? How does that contribute to discourses, ways of thinking and speaking about people that filters its way through the whole process, which starts to marginalise particular people? And it does marginalise people in relation to class, race and ethnicity, sexuality. We're seeing rise in hate crimes in relation to lots of different groups that we might separate in terms of different categories of social differentiation. And I think that a lot of it does stay in academia, but I would say that civil society organisations and movements are really important in challenging this. Social media is important too. And some people, I know some people who do absolutely amazing work with civil society organisations. So I'm particularly interested in those of how we might challenge dominant, that kind of overarching, that key way of defining people. And so I think that's what I mentioned.
Patriarchy.
Patriarchy. Yes, challenging those dominant structures like patriarchy, something that filters through all different institutions. It kind of separates us out in some kind of way. It reveals privileges, in other forms. So I think there's a more effort perhaps, and that is challenging in a climate where we need to get funding, and you essentially get funding for one project, and as soon as that comes to an end, there might be elements of dissemination, getting your research out there, but there's that pressure to apply for more funding to another project, so you're almost moving on to the next one before you feel like before you've got that out there. So I think that's probably the key, is maybe a change in academia, being able to do it as a bit of a slight, a slower process. Everything doesn't need to be, this is 1 year funded, and you do it, and you write it up, and then you've got the articles to do from it. But you want to get it out there to people too, and I think a change there might help us do that.
Susan, I'm just wondering, because you and I both work in the disability area, and have been doing it for some time. There's often the disabled people the most studied group in the world. There's lots of research that's been done in different areas to do with disability. So I just want to ask controversially, does it make a difference? At the end of the day, we've got, really high suicide rates for disabled people in the UK under austerity. We've got less access to independent living. The disabled people are locked outside the workforce in really high numbers.
I think that
How do we deal with that? Does it make a difference, or are we just kind of complicit in the process? I'm putting you on the spot here, complicit in the process of providing research that suits government agendas.
I think what the others have been suggesting is absolutely right to disability too, in relation to what extent does our research influence at that very practical level of practice, at a policy level, in terms associated with that. I think the funding runs obviously have a clear influence in relation to what's achievable, like the others have been highlighting, where the funding is coming from a government source, where it's coming from local authority, from a national source that has their own agenda, and there's a question about to what extent can we influence at that level. whereas funding at a research council level, which gives you potentially more freedom to influence. But I think the issue that we highlighted actually too is that this process of implementation takes time. What I think that certainly I think that within the UK perspective, we have social model of disability which has been around for many years now. That is, you can be quite confident that is shaping practice, it is shaping how we think about disability, shaping equality and diversity discussions, and that way of thinking is also informed at an international level. We have a UN Convention on the Rights of Disabilities. What's particularly interesting in relation to that is that we have a huge number of countries around the world that have signed up to a convention. Within the UK we are, and this is a convention that is shaped by a certain way of viewing disability as a social construction. So something that is socially, that there are barriers within society that are disabling. And that way of thinking is shaping our policy, our practices within the UK. What's more of a challenge is to see how something that has been ratified at an international level by individual countries, the extent to which that can be implemented at national. So we have countries including China, where John's working, that have ratified this convention, and the challenges of working within a Western model of understanding of disability, applying that within very culturally, socially, politically diverse settings. So these are areas that is designed to explore within her own research. So I think it's something around any particular characteristics with disability, with gender, to understand them at both the natural, local level, in relation to implementation from research, but also the international level, and the opportunities to frame thinking and how transferable that is within different countries. Like, I guess when we have an international panel like this, we have opportunities to start to think about to what extent does knowledge travel?
Yeah, and how does knowledge travel across different social worlds, but also realising, and I wanted to draw to the last few questions before we hand over to the audience, that change is a really slow process. So I think sometimes there's always a tension with researchers to produce instant knowledge with instant impacts, but actually I think for most of us that have been travelling this road for some time, we realise that change is a slow process. It's a bit like water wearing away the rock. It's kind of an incremental approach. But the other good thing about working in the international context with other people is that people can share ideas. I mean, gone are the days where people in remote countries cannot hear about what's happening in another part of the world, and that would include grassroots activists and researchers. Okay, I want to draw to to not to close yet, but to kind of looking at wisdom here. What would you say to what advice would you give to your 15-year-old self? You know, in terms of, I guess, the kind of options and opportunities around career choices. So, one of the things that's come up here is about the influence of people in your lives has made a difference. But there's also been a need for a bit of confidence pushing too and believing in oneself. What advice would you give to your 15-year-old self? Yeah, do you want to go? You've got the mic there.
Well, we already know what I was doing when I was 15.
You were frantic.
So I think my 15-year-old self certainly didn't think everything here today. But I think that my sort of approach to life is that I think to plan, well, nothing is fixed. I think that's, and to be open to opportunities. Sometimes we have ideas of where we want to be. So at 15, maybe we have a vision of the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I do hear people talking about kind of very interesting people. House for life.
That mic still.
House for life. The idea that you would buy a house and that will see you through to the end of your days as if that's it. My life has never been, nothing's ever been for life. But I think it's being open to what's come your way. And to find what drives you, and even if you end up in places that you didn't expect to be, to make the most of it. So I think that's good advice.
To know the plan.
have a joke, we can do that really.
Camila, we just might pass it down. So Camila, 15-year-old self, what advice would you give to your 15-year-old self? What have you learned since you were 15?
I think that never cut a fringe, because I did when I was terrible. So I can say that I look back, that's me the one for me, because you see everybody looks amazing, everybody, but yourself just doesn't work. So that's the first advice that I would give to myself. And also I think that a young person is really organized and that thinks to plan too far and says how the things will be. And they are really not like that. My life changed a lot the last 2 years, and what I see is that we'll keep changing a lot. And I think that also not to put too high expectations in myself. When I was 15, I wanted to go inside university straight forward, and not too fast, And I perceived that I will turn 30 this year. Not such a difference from the 15, but it's half of the way. And I think that it's like slow down, respect the time of life, society. Things will come in a certain time for me, for the others, and also that there is a space for everybody to shine in the road. We don't need to overlap anyone, and yes, I think that the fringe is the most important one. Not to me at least.
Trish.
How does it get fringe?
Didn't work for me.
I find this question really difficult, so I'm not going to linger over it, but I suppose it's about belief, and I think I'm not going to give a message about that, because actually that's just so unique to the individual, but there's something about the kind of relationships that we have and how we give these positive messages for where people are. There was also something for me, we spoke about what did you want to be, what did you want to do. It's maybe a little bit older than 15, but it's a reminder that there's more to life than work. It's great to be sitting here, it's great to be in the role that I'm in, but you're going to kind of, if you go to uni and you graduate, you've got 50 years of work, and it's that bit, there's a whole world there, there's a whole 101 aspects of life that nurture who you are in work. So, I think that's my typical case. My advice wouldn't be about research and work, it would be much broader.
Yeah, that's great. Lynn.
My 15-year-old self would not listen to a word someone at my age was saying to them. Absolutely no chance. And like Trish, mine wouldn't be about work or research. I would hint to my 15-year-old self to learn to play guitar and to learn to speak a foreign language. They're the two things I wish I'd done. And it's like you're saying, Trish, more time for other aspects of your life. We're not just, as I get towards the end of my career, I realise that your work is important and you commit to it, but it's not what defines you.
Yeah.
I would say to 15-year-old self that just be the way you are. Because when I was 15, I was bullied in my school. I was bullied by the boys in my class, and because, back then I was with fringe. I had a baby face with fringe, cut half of my face to look like, to make my half of my face even shorter, even round. And I was a geek, and I was always focusing my work, my study, and the teachers always give me a great confidence. So the rest of the classmates would think that they a little bit hated me because the teachers been nice to me. But I would say to myself that the 15-year-old just be the way you are, and yeah.
Right. Sounds like contentment and at ease.
But without the fringe.
Yeah.
Picking up from her, I would tell my 15-year-old self, keep going, it's going to get better. And 15 years since, and yesterday I was at the Tower Building Cafe, and I was looking at the view, and I was telling myself, pause, be grateful for what you got. And I had the voice haircut, and when I was 15, and I was bullied too. And my teachers, like one of my male teachers, told me that, okay, if you want, when you grow up, you can have your boy's haircut if your husband likes. And now I don't like your haircut. You have to get a girl's haircut, or you have to grow your hair. And I did not do what he asked me to do. I did not have long hair until I went to university. And I'm happy for what I did, and I will tell my 15-year-old self, you did well.
Brilliant. Now next year, we're pre-announcement, we're doing a workshop on haircuts and haircuts. Yay, I think this could be, so we're going somewhere with this. Andrea.
I think confidence is a key word to me. Be confident, believe in yourself, not give up, do your best, not enjoy the moment without concern too much about the future, and never let the fear hold you back or prevent you to do what you want to do. I think this was my big lesson. I was a person very shy in my adolescence, not confident, insecure, not talkative, with a lot of fear to try new things, fear to make my decisions, and now I see that was a waste of time. So we have to believe in ourselves always, do what we believe, and have good friends surround you as well. This helps a lot. And yeah.
Right. Ashley.
For me, what I would say to my 15-year-old self, I've always said to my 32-year-old self now. But I think the key is, for me, I overthink. And I overthink everything. So it would be even, I'll probably go and overthink by oversharing or something here. So it ticks away and ticks away, and I think that can eat you up a little bit. And I think and potentially this exists, outside of academia, because I still did it when I was in other jobs as well, but I think in academia you can, as much as you might work in teams and so on, there's something, you're in your own little silo as well at times, particularly if you're writing something on your own, and it's just to not overthink that process, not think about where I want to get to all the time, because I thought about that all the way along, and I never thought I'd do a PhD, but at the start of the PhD I thought, I can't wait to have the PhD. And then I got the PhD, but it was then like, now I need to do the articles, I need to get a job, and I never enjoyed it. So you just keep going like that, and I guess you don't end up enjoying the end of it. So it kind of entails everything that all the other women have said, yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. Now, Lynn's going to have to go, and she has to pick up her grandkids, so he's the classic that's going to. So thanks for participation to the panel. So I'd like to hand over to the audience, and Reddy, my daughter, is going to run around the roving microphone, and we'll take some questions. I think there's another microphone over there. Okay, and you can turn the audio recorder off. And the reason we're turning off folks is we live in this environment of